Hi everyone, this is Colleen, and this is Haggie Reads for you on Haggie Shack Radio at haggieshack.com. And this is Tuesday, June 14th, 2016. And today I'm going to pick up where I left off last week with Children of the Law of One, The Lost Teachings of Atlantis by John Pennell. Another common situation in which you hear the cry of brainwashing is in child custody cases, where a child favors one parent and turns against the other. The rejected parent will most often blame the other parent for brainwashing the child and turning them against them. Again, in both of these instances, it could be true or just a slur. But where the term brainwashing originally came from, and what it really means, is something altogether different. The term really came from hideous methods of using force to alter programming, under extreme duress, totally involuntarily. Various modern forced brainwashing methods were invented during World War II by spies and military types to control people's minds. Oddly enough, such World War II methods are employed by so-called cult deprogrammers, but I have never heard of a cult using such horrible methods to bend or break someone's mind to their way of thinking. A cult may employ strong or clever influencing and manipulation methods, but any I have ever heard of are still really ultimately allowing free choice. If they did, they would be jailed, like many deprogrammers have been. A deprogrammer, however, generally takes severe, true forced brainwashing approaches, commonly hiring or enlisting people to kidnap a person and or hold them prisoner by force, and in one way or another cause a total emotional mental breakdown, so that they can infuse the programming they, or typically the parents that hired them, want them to have. Even the term deprogrammer is a deception. They are reprogrammers in the tradition of forced, emotionally torturous classic brainwashers. They employ various brainwashing methods, all while the person is being held virtual or literal prisoner by either family, friends, accomplices, or hired black belt thugs. It may be relatively mild, but that is rare. Sometimes it involves surrounding the victim with a dozen or more people who constantly scream at them, attacking their emotional and mental weaknesses, their beliefs. And when total nervous breakdown finally occurs, they fill the victim's mind with what is right and true to believe, whatever the brainwasher wants them to believe. This may go on for hours or days, as the deprogrammers take turns in rest, while the helpless prisoner is denied sleep or their own free thoughts. Sometimes they tie a person to a chair naked, refuse them sleep, water, or food. I've never heard anyone even claim such radical things took place in religious cults. Like I said, such behavior would result in arrest and prison. There have been the odd suicide pacts, but again, upon analysis, people voluntarily choose to do it, with the possible exception of Jones. So no matter how weird, if they choose it without true brainwashing, they at least had some choice. But deprogrammers leave absolutely no choice. Manipulation of the psyche, whether it be by a cult, media, or car salespeople, is wrong. Make no mistake. And the results of such manipulation can be devastatingly different. like that between ending up with a car you never intended to buy, or supporting a war that doesn't have any true foundation, or committing suicide. But that is my whole point. That is what parts of the ancient teachings and parts of this book are for. To teach you to take control of your own programming and prevent others from manipulating your mind. But deprogrammers are among the worst. They usually cross the line and justify their going beyond mere manipulation of your mind. And while some deprogrammers have fortunately been arrested and imprisoned, too many are allowed to do their dirty work and get away with it, because they are attacking generally unpopular religions. Let someone try deprogramming a Catholic because they have weird ways, like believing they're eating the flesh and blood of Jesus during communion, or deprogramming a Pentecostal for speaking in tongues, or a Jew for wailing at the wall and refusing to eat pork, etc., etc., and see how far the deprogrammer gets before being incarcerated. Again, it's the size of the religion that determines whether or not the term cult is applied, and all the prejudice and mistreatment that go with it. And if you want to talk about something ending in tragedy, deprogrammers leave a trail of devastated lives. I have studied this in college, and I have personally known 6 people who were deprogrammed, other than 2 failed attempts on me. One of these was a novice student of mine. The others were from various small Christian churches, cults, if you choose to call them that, of one kind or another. All were previously happy, well-adjusted people. One was beaten to death by his deprogrammers, black belt jailers. 2 ended up committing suicide within a few months of being fixed by the deprogrammers. 1 ended up a permanent resident of a mental ward. 1 became a deprogrammer himself, and another did what they were reprogrammed to do: shift directions in life. In that last case, the person sort of adjusted to living a life they never really wanted in the first place, a life that didn't allow them to fulfill their spiritual potential as much as their original programming would have, and their true free will choices would have. It also left bad scars and emotional brain damage, including mental blocks, memory loss, and strange physical illnesses. You can say this was karmic too, but most people's programming has something to do with their karma, is a reflection of and part of their karma. And while a deprogramming or brainwashing can also be karmic, it could also be an attack from the dark forces that comes out of the blue, leaving you virtually unable to even deal with your karma and fulfill your original destiny. Whether a programming change is fully voluntary or somehow manipulated, which most every religion, political party, or salesman will attempt, or is actually forced, the same result occurs. Programming is altered. So that's the bottom line, and that's what really needs to be focused on. Because of all the things mentioned throughout this entire chapter, the ancient Atlantean teachings of the children cover all aspects of programming. This includes teaching how to free yourself from unwanted programming, to avoid brainwashing, and how to be in control of and consciously reprogram your own mind. In order to change your susceptibility to manipulation and strengthen your independence of thought, you must first realize the facts and implications involved. Then, using a teacher, meditation, self-hypnosis, various vibrational techniques, biofeedback, or other means of accessing modified states, you can set about re-evaluating the entire contents of your mind, the source of most feelings and thoughts. You may also want to use the Atlantean vibrational sound tape. Then, you'll finally be safe from brainwashing by even the dreaded car salesman. A final thought. Important fact. No matter how good of a means you use to self-program your subconscious mind, it will not accept the programming unless you really want to change. So take control of your life on both conscious and subconscious levels. Don't believe anything you haven't really experienced yourself, or a truly trusted or objective person you know has experienced. Don't let anyone program you anymore, but yourself. You decide your beliefs, not press releases, books, ads, media owners and controllers, leaders, religions, department store owners, car salesmen, gas station attendants, your friends, your relatives, your mates, this book, a teacher, or anyone but you. And remember, kindness and unselfish love for everything and everyone are the only really important things. If something doesn't include that, watch out. I'd like to add one final statement regarding cultures. One of the best eye-opening experiences anyone can have that shows them just how much we are all programmed is to experience different cultures. Not just vacations here and there, but really experiencing as many different cultures in the world as possible. The same basic human being can have such radically different beliefs and different ways of living that a person who hasn't experienced it couldn't really believe it. You can get it intellectually, of course, and watch travel shows, but you don't really get it until you've done it. Most of you reading this would be shocked to see a baby buried alive because it was born a female. But that's just scratching the surface. And your culture is just as appalling and shocking to me. When will you all wake up and take control of your programming and reprogram yourself in the light of truth, kindness, and universal consciousness? When will you stop killing those who bring you new ideas? Maybe soon, because the universe, this planet, is going to change things here radically because of what humans have done, and it's coming, ready or not. Chapter 12. The Paths. One morning I woke and began writing down my dreams in a log as usual, but my dreams lingered. I was still in that state in between sleep and awake. I had dreamt about and was remembering all the various cultures and people I'd witnessed on my way to the monastery. They were all so different, and everyone was locked into the habit patterns and beliefs of their particular life, within their particular culture. Some perhaps were learning, changing, and growing. Others weren't going anywhere, but in circles. As I climbed out of my womb, I noticed a note stuck under my mat. It was a reading list from Zayn. Created we the path upon our separation from the Infinite One. The way out is the way back. One way back. Walk must we in our own excrement. Created we all obstacles. All must be met as we follow the road home. The path is. To return to the One is death to the separate self. A great fight it will wage. Great pain it will inflict. Only those who have learned the greater pain lies in separation from the One will choose the spiritual path. Many paths there are. All spiritual paths lead to the One. As closer you return, recognize you will your true self, your true family. Recognize you will the face of a stranger. Judge not the path of another. Learn to understand, that you may not understand the path of another. Judge the path of another, only to judge and determine your own path. Never condemn another, condemn only actions. The path takes us through walls of fire, burning us away. Sharp teeth, ripping away our flesh. Why then am I not harmed? The path is beset with traps. The wildflowers draw us with their sweet perfume. Thorns prick at our feet. Mud drags us down, above and below. Rocks loosen and fall. Walk in the footsteps of those who have found the way before you. The ease or difficulty one experiences while walking the path to oneness is directly determined by the degree of their humility and unselfish love. Pain and pleasure are swings in the arc of a pendulum. To the degree the pendulum swings into pleasure, it will swing into the same degree of pain. Many paths present themselves that lead to pleasure. With free will we choose. Choose not pleasure, and you will create not pain. Choose not pleasure, and pain will chase you not. Accept the little pleasures that come to you. Endure the pain that may come to you with long-suffering patience. Hear me, O man. Turn from the darkness of night. Turn towards the love of light. Know that your mind leads your direction. Turn from the thoughts that lead you astray. Turn to the thoughts of giving and light. They lead you to oneness, not darkness of night. Find not the great path in power and glory. Find it you will in the dust at your feet, with head bowed in regret and humility. Beg you must with all heart. Ask then the Universal One to guide you, with heart that is ready to serve all it shows. Pray that your will be that of the One. Pray the One send to you one who is one, to show you the light and illuminate your soul. Seek God first, and all else will come to you. As you walk your path, let this always be your prayer to the Universal Spirit. Your will be done, not mine, in me and through me. I left the library and was walking down the path to the hot pool. As I looked down at my feet on the path, it struck me. I was walking on my path, my spiritual path. I had finally found it, and was really walking on it. I had a moment of elation, realization, and then a strikingly powerful Kundalini rush of energy, a spiritual evolutionary force that actually changes aspects of your physical, spiritual body as you evolve. It's explained more later in the book for those of you who aren't familiar with it. When I recovered, I decided I should go down to the hot pool to get a sweat, since such a Kundalini experience often triggered physical eliminations of toxins, as it purified your body. The hot pool would help me release at least some of them in a more pleasant and easier manner. Besides, I wanted to contemplate all that I had read more, and also I wanted to contemplate and examine my dreams and thoughts of the morning. Already in the pool, I found, not to my surprise, none other than my personal true teacher, Zayn. "Ah, you have been kissed by the god again, yes?" he said, referring to the Kundalini experience. "More like raped and beaten up. No, I'm sorry, I shouldn't joke about it that way. It's a wonderful blessing and a heavenly experience, even though painful at times. Yes, I have been kissed." "Very good, very good." I slipped into the pool, which seemed hotter than usual to my sensitized body. "Father, why are there so many different cultures and ways of living? And why are some people really seeking God, and others just pretending, and others openly disinterested?" Way too much of a question for a simple answer. And I was just dealing with my own contemplations this morning, as I enjoyed the properties of the water. "I'm sorry to disturb you." "No problem, son. I was about to get out anyway. You've already learned many of the reasons behind the separations. So I think what you really question in your mind is mainly about people's paths and varying cultures, is it not?" "Yes, in part at least." Anywhere we are, anywhere our journey through life takes us, is our path. In that sense, everyone is on their path. But not everyone is on what we might call a spiritual path. A spiritual path is when the direction of our path is one that can finally lead us in the direction of spirit, rather than materiality. Lead us to unselfish love, rather than selfishness. Lead us to universal consciousness, rather than separate consciousness. Our path often takes us to the school of hard knocks. So only when people are on their spiritual path are they learning? They are always being given the opportunity to learn, regardless of the type of path. Karma is constantly being created, and life keeps trying to teach us something by providing us with our own self-created lessons that explode in our faces. Getting taught in that way has been called the school of hard knocks. But while everyone suffers the slings and arrows of life experiences, most people ignore these lessons, which are being constantly presented to us. This is unfortunate when it is ignored, because suffering can cause us to be introspective and really take a hard look, a deep look, at the whys of our life experiences. After we've had enough suffering to open our eyes, we realize we need to change. Therein lies the value of the pain. As you've already learned, transcending our separate self and renouncing selfishness is painful too. It's like crucifying yourself. Most people won't choose the spiritual path until they realize that the pain caused as a result of living selfishly outweighs the pain of the spiritual path. But as I said, from time to time, people get hit with an unpleasant life experience, suffer, and get introspective. That's when they can more easily realize that it is worth it to choose the spiritual path. Is that the only way someone finally chooses a spiritual path? No. It wasn't that way with you, really. Your consciousness and destiny chose it for you. And there are also other factors that can influence people to take the spiritual path. During the introspective times brought by suffering, people are more aware of that constant, painful gnawing that exists from the lack of inner peace. It reminds them, at least internally or subconsciously, about the great fact that the suffering caused by remaining separate and selfish will never end unless you return to oneness with the universal spirit, and that they can never really be happy as a separate, selfish self. Never. You may have temporary high points and get-offs, but that's it. On the other hand, the pain of crucifying the selfish, separate self is just temporary. And when you're done, you have inner peace. And that's the only true happiness. And the only happiness that never leaves you. When people suffer enough self-pain, they will eventually realize this. When one finally realizes this, and thus decides to take the return trip, is when the real spiritual journey begins. This is the point when we each begin our real spiritual path. His words reminded me of all the different religions and spiritual paths that I'd tried and studied before finding the one I was on now. Exactly what do you mean they're real spiritual path? Some are false? And why are there so many different spiritual paths and cultures? In search of the archetype. Oh, again with the multiple questions, and so early in the morning. He was sounding like a rabbi, and he wasn't even Jewish. Well, I guess he was sort of Jewish in the broadest ancient sense, but also all the other religions rolled into one. Let me start with your last question first. There are as many specific paths back to the source of our being as there are individuals. It can be no other way. Each entity is where they are, and basically what they are, because of the separate paths and experiences they have had and created in arriving at that point in time and space. Likewise, each entity has their own particular way to return or backtrack from that point. Let's use an allegory. Let's say there is this mountain of life. On all sides of this great mountain are paths, millions of paths. These paths have been created from people starting at the top, which is the point of oneness and of universal spirit. And all these paths are winding their way down the mountain, which is separateness and materiality in various ways. On each of these paths is a person. These people are at all kinds of different places on their path. Some are down at the base of the mountain, and some are near the top. Some don't care to climb the mountain, and some want to because they have realized they must get to the top to find oneness and peace. To get to the top, they each have a different route, the path they made themselves from the top. It doesn't really matter where each person's path is. They all still end up back at the top. As we get closer to the top, some paths converge. We converge with soulmates and with soul groups. I understand soulmates, but what are soul groups? Soul groups are other beings who are like our spiritual family, those who were close to us in our previous state of existence, or have grown closer to us for one reason or another. As we go higher, we need to grow closer with our soul groups, but particularly with our soul mates, because at some point right near the top, we need to merge and function again as one being, with male and female elements if present, rather than as separated and opposing males and females. Anyway, as we get very close to the top, we find that we and the others who are very close to the top are getting more alike. That's because there are archetypes, patterns for certain beings that are the same at the higher consciousness levels. After all, the closer we get to becoming one, the more one we become, thus the more similar we become. While you probably have not seen this yet, you will, and you may have already experienced something similar. Have you ever noticed strangely strong similarities, physical or otherwise, between certain unrelated people? Yes, I have. I've also read about archetypes and seen certain examples of it. Little did I know at the time how much I would see. Most people don't get to actually experience this so directly and shockingly, but I have, because of my path and my spiritual duties. During my first 3 years of traveling after leaving the monastery, I was in part working on bringing the people that were high on the allegorical mountain, yet still unaware of each other, closer together. The time was drawing near when more understanding of different beliefs, practices, and paths was becoming necessary. I witnessed entire spiritual communities, whose members were identical or near identical doubles, as if they had all had multiple twins or clones of other people from other paths at a similar level of consciousness. These physical clones all had levels of consciousness that were virtually the same, yet they had different backgrounds, different types of spiritual development, and somewhat different beliefs. And this was no strange scientific experiment. It was simply a manifestation of our spiritual manifestation on earth. I even met a couple of doubles of Zayin, but one had black hair rather than silver. Judge for yourself, only. Now, for your second to the last question about false paths. Some people who have concluded that their path is the right way think that since their path is the right way for them, it must mean that it is the only right path, and that other paths are not the right way. They consider all other paths false or a lost way. But this may not be true. Let's use the mountain allegory again. Some people think that others must not be on the path at all, simply because they don't see the others on their path, and thus going up the mountain. They don't realize that others are climbing their own paths on different parts of the mountain. So they make false judgments, because they don't realize that they can't see the other people, simply because they cannot see them from their point of view. And they don't realize that just because they can't see the other people, it doesn't mean they aren't climbing the mountain on their own paths. Stepping out of our mountain allegory for a moment and trying to explain it another way, it's like this. Many people don't accept the paths of others because they can't understand it from their point of view. They don't realize that the other person's path may lead back to God also. Getting back to the mountain allegory again, the closer that people get to the top, which means the more expansive they get in consciousness, the greater their point of view. The top of the mountain has been becoming smaller, narrower, closer together, and thus it is easier to see more sides of the mountain at the same time, and see that others' paths are also converging on the top. We, too, often see individuals of one particular path taking the attitude that their way is the way, and all others are not on the path. This reflects their lower position on the mountain, their degree of lack of consciousness. So there isn't just one true spiritual path? Yes and no. How can I make it clearer? No particular path is the path for everyone at a given place and time in their consciousness, even though it may be the path for the particular individual who's on it. However, there comes a time when all must transcend their separations, their separate selves, to get to the top of the mountain where all are one. Those are the final steps of any true spiritual path. This is what we will call the path of unselfish love. To get to the top, all must consciously climb the mountain step by step, no matter where you're starting from or where your particular path takes you. So we shouldn't judge others at all? With certain necessary exceptions. We really shouldn't judge others unless it is for the purpose of making choices or navigating on our own path, in which case we must judge. For instance, you may have to judge whether or not someone you're thinking of hanging out with is bad or not because of the influences that it will or may have on you. Otherwise, how are you to decide your own path? Or you may judge in order to learn from the mistakes of others, instead of making them yourself. In a voting political society, people must judge the character of who they want to vote for in order to make the best choices for running a country. They may have to come to the conclusion that so-and-so is a bad person and shouldn't be running things. That's judging someone, isn't it? Yes? And is that wrong? Well, no, of course not. There are many such judgments you must make in life, but most people don't just judge, they condemn. And there's a big difference between judging and condemning. Condemning is judging without unselfish love. It is a judgment tinged with resentment, hostility, hatred, or anger, and it is damaging to both the person who is condemning and the person who is being condemned. Judging alone is sufficient to allow you to take positive action. You don't need to be condemning of someone because they're doing something bad. And some things may not be bad, but just things that are not right for you. You have to discriminate that too. But there will be times when you need to judge that something is bad so that you do not do the same. Many things are necessary on the many paths people must tread to learn their lessons or pay back their karma. And it is not for us to condemn. It is also not for us to interfere unless it hurts us or others. So when you decide that you like someone or dislike someone, are you judging them or condemning them? It can be either. Most people place those they meet or know into one or two categories: people they like and people they don't like. This is pretty much the same as dividing people into categories of good and bad. But for those situations in which you do not need to discern your own path by judging someone and deciding the ramifications of associating with them, there is another way that should be looked at. Rather than focusing on a person's so-called good qualities or bad qualities, liking or disliking them, one should see the whole being. Author's note: like with the car we described in an earlier chapter, that had one good side and one damaged. In order to serve the universal spirit and help our kin, one should not disregard the other aspects of a person's nature and focus just on the good or the bad. There is something else to consider also that may mislead you in judging a person's character if you are not seeing from a higher perspective. If you're seeing people with limited perception, you may see someone during a time and day in which they are strongly exhibiting their good nature or their bad nature. Someone else may have seen that same person during a time and day in which they were strongly exhibiting the opposite of the nature that you perceived. Thus, people often seem like a good or a bad person, just depending on your point of view or time of view. Again, seeing both sides is the only way of truly knowing the real person, and we should have unlimited love for everyone without exception. Just as the sun shines on all without exception, all the time, in all directions. Now, if you are a true teacher, dealing with a student who has asked you for your criticism, though, you have a job to do, and you must look for and point out faults in the student's character at all times, and not allow for moods. But that is your duty in such a situation. That is what they've asked you to do for them so they can improve and grow towards the light in our everlasting pursuit of perfection. But you should also point out their potential. So the path can be painful and humiliating for the student. What do you think? I smiled. Obviously. What a stupid thing to say. You have yet to face your greatest trials. I've heard that before, and it scared the yak dung out of me. I'm not afraid. Bring 'em on. Sure. He looked at me with that look again. Climbing to our crucifixion. As was said earlier, the path that lies before a person who is truly committed to transcending their separate self and returning to universal consciousness can be painful at times. After all, your separate self has surrounded your life with illusions and programming that support separateness and selfishness. It has created a false person of its own that has the illusion of having its own life, an actual illusion that it is alive and living. To be one with the universal spirit again involves killing this false being and all of its selfish, separate illusions and programming. This hurts. It will fight it. It's fighting for its very survival, and you have been tricked thoroughly into believing it is you. It is like killing yourself. Not a simple task, nor a painless one. It is a path of cross-bearing and purification by fire. A now Islamic poet once put it this way: like dry wood takes to fire, the truth will come to you. How true! If you endure this purification by fire with patience, understanding, and humility, you will come to realize your essential nature, inner being, soul, oneness with the universal spirit. Why? Because the soul is indestructible, and when all else of you is purged and burned away from the suffering you experience, there will be the soul, shining like the sun, emerging from the clouds. Making crucifixion fun at least a bit easier. It is said that the path is covered with rose bushes. The flowers draw us and offer us pleasure. But attachment to pleasure is a danger here. Try to take the rose, and the thorns prick us and cause us to suffer. Have you heard this? Love is a rose, but you better not pick it. Only grows when it's on the vine. Handful of thorns and you know you've missed it. Lose your love when you say the word mine. So true. Here's the good news. Along this path of rose bushes, one can find footprints that were made by the great ones who have gone before us. If we make sure that we walk only in their footsteps, we will avoid many of the pitfalls, the detours, and the traps, and the painful mistakes that we will come upon along the way. Humility and unselfish love lighten the burden. Traveling your path is made easier by humility and unselfish love. The greater your degree of humility, the easier and the shorter your path will be. Spiritual growth can be experienced as agonizing torture that you must endure, or as an enlightening learning experience that you desire and relish. It all depends on you and your attitude. One of my novice students, one who learned the fastest of all thus far, learned so fast just because of humility. She was a total stranger, living with the man I was discussing life with. We were talking about what he was capable of doing for the world if he followed his spiritual path. She just listened. As I was leaving and preparing to put on my sandals, she bent over and put them on for me. A simple act, but a gesture of the humility that indicated her true greatness. It heralded the potential that was within this shining novice. It reminded me of a text I'd read relating to humility during Grand Master Thoth's last lifetime, the Essene lifetime as Jesus. It was regarding an argument between the students of Jesus. In the area and time it was custom to wash one's feet when entering a house, to get the dirt off and keep the floors clean. It was a tradition and humble honor for the master of the house to wash your feet for you. But Jesus' students, more concerned with their egos, their selfish separate selves, and their status among his other students, refused to wash each other's feet. So in deep sadness over their lack of humility and selfishness, Jesus did it, showing that true spirituality, true greatness, was clothed in humility. His actions exemplified humility, even more than his words. He who would be the greatest would be the servant to all, and he who would be the first will be the last. Seeking pleasure brings its mate. "Father," I ask, "I'm worried, upset, and I guess afraid. What should I do? Is there anything that can make it easier? Anything that I should be doing that I'm not? Should I deny my self-urges and live more of the life of an ascetic? Would that help?" I told you, humility is the biggest key. As far as being an ascetic, contrary to how you may feel at times, ours is a gentle, moderate, and balanced path. And this is for a good reason. From the early days of Atlantis, we have learned that extremes, such as asceticism, can have extreme repercussions, and should only be used when such severity is really called for. This situation of yours is not as such. Then what should I do? First, learn this well, and then apply it. Pain and pleasure are one of those dichotomies of the earth plane. They are thus seemingly opposite, yet they are just the extreme polarities of the same thing, sensation. The range of sensation is traversed by a pendulum that swings within our emotions. If the pendulum swings into pleasure, it will swing back into pain. And the greater the depth of the swing into pleasure, the greater the depth of the return swing into pain. For every self-gratification, there is an equal degree of suffering. This is an aspect of universal law. It is best not to seek pleasure. That doesn't mean avoid it. Just accept it when it comes, but don't pursue it. It keeps the pendulum much more centered. This is one of the ways to make things a little easier. In the end, the love you take is equal to the love you make. Wow! The headlines the editor chose for this chapter would be a great oldies musical infomercial. But back to our discussion. So I create problems every time I seek to satisfy any of my selfish desires, which I keep doing all the time, so I keep making more trouble and pain for myself. Of course. But the good news is you are realizing that. When you're actually realizing that unselfish love is the answer to every problem, you can stop creating more suffering and problems. But as it is with cause and effect, or karma, you still have to deal with all that you have already created. There's no way to avoid or sidestep it, actually. You can delay it. You have free will, after all. And those of the dark side use delay and avoidance methods all the time. But if you do, you are only delaying, fooling yourself, making even bigger problems by piling up more karma, like sweeping dirt under a carpet and pretending it's gone. Someday, you'll have to clean it up, and the more you've piled up, the more you'll have to clean, eventually. By the way, have you looked under the mat lately? I have. I remembered the note he left me under my mat, and that actually I had been sweeping dirt and dust under it. Again, the bottom line is that the path back to oneness with the universal spirit and the attainment of universal consciousness is that of the crucifixion of the selfish separate self, selfish desire. Painful, yes, but humility eases the pain, makes the journey easier, and unselfish love lightens the burden. Getting down to work. Few have experienced enough or learned enough from their lessons in life to listen to the real truth about the separate self. The light of truth is a threat to the darkness, illusions, deceptions created by the self-body-mind. And there are many deceptions and detours along the way, or stepping stones, depending on how you deal with them. I could say, the path is merely chanting a special word for 5 minutes a day, and by doing this, you will be able to see auras, have out-of-body experiences, read minds, etc. Just send a check or money order for $200, and we'll give you your own magic word right away. But that isn't true, isn't real, and wouldn't really give someone all they need for spiritual growth, enlightenment, becoming one with God. But it would be popular and probably make someone a lot of money. Those who offer something to the selfish desires of people are very popular. There are many personal growth and spiritual growth methods being offered that don't threaten the separate selfish self. The most popular religions are the ones that allow the most selfishness and place the least self-sacrificing demands on the person, or are the least threatening to the separate self. Here's a little secret for measuring how real a particular spiritual tradition or growth method is. Just look at how popular it is, or unpopular it is. It is not a hard and fast rule, but generally, the smaller or more unpopular the path is, the more it threatens the separate self, and thus the more real truth and growth potential it offers. Enlightenment is not easy, and not something that can be bought and sold. It takes constant, conscious effort and application in all aspects of life. The last part of my discussions with Zayin about paths dealt with this subject more in depth. You haven't totally answered my first question yet, Father. You mentioned real spiritual paths, which seems to intimate that there are false ones, but you didn't really seem to say it in that context. I know you're very busy today, but would you please tell me why, if you have time? I don't have the time, but there is a sundial over there if you really need it. No, seriously, Father. Seriously. Okay. There are definitely purely false spiritual paths, but even some of those offer something real. Then there are other paths that are semi-false, and that they are not the person's ultimate true path. These may be just a temporary, yet important, part of a person's entire spiritual path, or they may become a trap, depending on the individual's level of consciousness, sincerity, or choices. Some traditions, paths, or methods are traps, side trips, excursions off the seeker's real path that a seeker can get caught up in. Nevertheless, people can move on through these experiences as part of their path, as I said earlier, like stepping stones along the way. Some people will go right on through such traps, onto a more truly spiritual path, if they have the proper unselfish spiritual attitude. It all is depending on the individual's ideals and applications within such circumstances. Well, I'm going to stop there and take a little break. I'll put on some music, and I'll see you in a few minutes.